Welcome to Far Louder, your official association podcast.
This episode is made possible by Assurance Financial. Home loans that start at home. You can find them at assurancemortgage.com or on Facebook. In a time where we're facing challenges that we are not accustomed to or things that we haven't dealt with since 2008 or longer, for even new agents who have never seen a market quite like this one, I thought it would be a good time to look back and see what some of the challenges of the past were, see where some of the traditions that we have today come from, and what really makes real estate in Fredericksburg special. So today I have an interview between Barbara Sanders, who is here as administrative staff, and John Simpson, the broker at Berkshire Hathaway, to talk about some of the journey of how real estate has changed and how a can-do attitude really is the key to success.
Hi, John Simpson. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Well, I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. So I understand you're with Berkshire Hathaway Home Services Simpson. Correct. All right. Well, I talked to you the other day, last week, for a good little while, and I was so excited about your approach to real estate in this business and the fact that you have maintained longevity over the long haul. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how you did that. So how long have you been in the business?
Almost 50 years.
50 years.
Almost.
So you've seen a lot of things.
I believe I started in 1971.
Oh, wow. So I have to tell you, that's the year I was born. Wow. Okay, so what kind of changes have you seen over the years, especially recently?
Well, when I started, Jimmy Pates and Ray Glazebrook were the only people in real estate, really. Mount Vernon had just started to come down here. And a friend of mine talked me into getting my real estate license.
What were you doing before that?
I was in the excavating business.
Okay.
And built roads and put in drain fields and did that sort of thing. And my main contractor went bankrupt on me. And so I had all these bills and no way to pay them. I had to figure out some way to make enough money. You couldn't do it at $10 an hour, $15 an hour.
Exactly.
So I had to do something that I could make some money. So I got in the real estate business.
How did you feel about that? Were you a little worried about how you were going to, get clientele and make a living in this business?
I've lived in Stafford all of my life. My father was a native, and my grandmother's family had gotten a grant from the King of England originally. Forever. We've been here.
Wow.
They'd been here forever. It was kind of a different, I always felt like I'd always be able to make money. We never had any money. We had land.
Well, there you go. Back then, that's what it is, right?
That's what it was. And so once I got started, my first transaction was with Nick Calamus. Nick is still in the business. He's with Carriage House.
He's still in the business too?
I think so.
Wow, okay.
But the first transaction was a duplex over in Highland Homes. It was $30,000 for a duplex.
So how did you feel when you landed that first transaction?
It was a start. The commission that I earned on that was $900.
Well, how did you know what you were doing? Your broker taught you? How did you
I had owned real estate and I inherited it as a child. And when 95 came through, it became relatively valuable. And I had people trying to buy it from me all the time. From the time I was 16 years old, there was somebody trying to talk me into selling real estate.
Wow. So this was somewhat of a calling. This business called you.
I didn't know what else to do. About the only thing I knew anything about. Had gotten out of college to start this construction company. It hadn't worked. needed to make a few dollars.
So I have a question for you. So when you started out, were you looking to just do residential, or were you looking to do commercial?
I didn't know what I wanted to do, but as I got into it, I said I wanted to do land and commercial.
Wow.
Because I was familiar with land. My father had been in the timber business. I'd walked timber with him as a kid. 10 years old, 11 years old, go out and look at timber and try to figure out what it was worth. He was a farmer. I learned to drive a tractor when I was 10 years old.
So you were all about the land.
Right, more or less.
Yes.
More or less.
I get it.
And so that was sort of the start that I had, and got into the business and started to make a little bit of money. I think I made $30,000 the first year, which wasn't a lot of money, but it was a lot to me. It was enough to
In 1971?
Yeah, it was
$30,000?
That was from March until January.
Wow. And you didn't consider that was successful?
No, that was the start.
That was just the start. Okay.
And so that sort of worked along, and I decided I wanted to learn more about the commercial side of it, so I took the first CCIM course, which is a math course put out by the Board of Realtors, and ended up going to D.C. Had to buy the calculator on the way to the class. Didn't know anything, and it started to come together. It's a full week class, and it came together about the third or fourth day, what they were trying to teach us.
So you were learning it. You were picking it up.
Trying to.
Well, so it didn't feel natural to you, what they were teaching you?
Well, math was easy to me.
Okay. Yeah.
But I figured it out what they were trying to do, and that helped a great deal. And then I had an opportunity when Howard Brooks decided to open up. He bought the little old information center there at the corner of the bridge, at Princess Anne and Route 1. And he said, why don't we put a commercial office in there? And he asked me if I wanted to run it. I had gotten my broker's license after 1 year. That's the way it was then. After a year in the business, you could take the broker's license. Okay,
because it's like 3 now, right?
But I took one of the classes and passed the test. And I'd been the broker for the Mount Vernon office for 2 years of that time because Leroy had a hard time passing the test. But I passed it so I could be a broker. So I was broker in name only.
Wow. So how many people were in the office? Just
30 at that time.
That's a lot of people, isn't it?
Yeah, but I didn't have to do anything. He was a broker. I was just in name only.
Because you passed the test.
I passed the test. So we opened up the little office. Alec Long, myself, Jackie Slate, 2 or 3 other people.
And all of you did commercial?
Just land and commercial.
So most of our realtors here, as you already know, are residential,
right,
in the residential part of real estate. So would you say that the approach to being a successful realtor is different with commercial as opposed to residential, or do you have the same sort of philosophy, or should you have the same philosophy?
I think as long as you're trying to help people, it works out okay. When you stop trying to help people, I think it becomes
So you need to be doing it for the service of it. That should be your primary motivator, not chase the money? Part of it.
You chase the money too.
Okay.
But the first big deal, a fellow by the name of George Newell called me and he said, John, I got a phone call from a guy that wants to buy a big piece of land. And he said, I know you know where all the land is in Stafford and Spotsylvania, so why don't I refer it to you? He said, give me 20% of the sale of what you make. I said, done. The fellow wanted to buy a large tract. I ended up selling him Crow's Nest which was 6,000 acres in Stafford at the time, the largest land tract in Stafford.
Wow.
Alec Long was the lister, and I sold it to Mount Vernon, got both sides of it. Alec and I flew to Florida, Miami, with the buyer who'd written it on one sheet of paper, a letter of intent.
Wow.
And we negotiated that deal. The people with Diversified who owned the property said, well, how do we know you can afford to buy a $6 million piece of property?
That's a good question.
And my answer there was, well, where's your banker? And they said, it's in Chicago. He said, we do some banking in Chicago. Why don't we let your banker talk to our banker, and if they don't have a problem with it, we'll walk away.
So that's how it was done.
They just called one banker, called the other one. They had both names. They called, and the comment that came back was that if they want the keys to your building, give them to them.
Oh my goodness.
And it turned out that it was an Exxon Corporation.
So what was your biggest deal that you've ever done?
Probably the Sheridan.
The Sheridan. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah. It started, a friend of mine had bought a piece of land here in Stafford. I was helping him accumulate more land. He ended up accumulating almost 1,000 acres.
Wow.
At 300, 200, 150, 30 acres at a time. It had taken us 2 or 3 years.
Gotcha.
He called and he said, John, I want to buy some income property. And he said, I understand, are there any warehouses or that sort of thing in the market? I said, there's a steel pack building over in part of the Shannon estate that's on the market. And he said, well, let's take a look at it. I looked at it, and they contracted and bought it.
For?
A couple of $1 million. Okay. It wasn't a whole lot.
Okay. Wasn't a whole lot.
And he said, now we need to find a tenant. I said, okay, I'll help you do that. He said, let me tell you, he said, how are you going to do it? I said, well, normally on this you need a commission of about 10%. But he said, why don't we do a commission of 6% and I'll give you the cash to do the advertising. Maybe we'll save some money. We did.
Wow.
So we put together advertising. At that, it was pre-internet.
Right.
Pre-internet. So you were doing mostly mailing and some ads, and you start like you were going to throw rocks in a pond.
Uh-huh.
You throw the first rock and it makes a little ripple close.
Yes.
The next rock is a little bigger rock and it goes a little further out, and the next one is further out. So we started, when we got to national advertising on the property for the eastern United States, the eastern part of the United States, we got a couple of calls. It was the Simmons Corporation.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So I got on an airplane and I flew down to Atlanta and met with the people at Simmons, and they leased it.
Wow. Wow.
That worked out. Then when they were there 5 or 6 years, when they decided to leave, he said, well, what are we going to do now? He said, well, let's see if you can find another tenant. So we worked on that and found another tenant. We found the stamp people. They came in, the ones that put the gum on the stamps. And so got them in, and we had worked with that for a while.
So how did you feel about these high price negotiations back then?
It's only money.
You didn't feel that this was too big for you?
No.
Wow. Okay.
No. Had all sorts of little things would go on. I dealt with, like I said, what do you call it? Talked with Silver.
Yes.
Carl did. I went to school with Larry and knew him, but I started doing a little business with Larry along the way, and we'd sold this building. The steel pack building had been part of the property that was owned by Mr. Shannon. And so after I'd sold the steel pack building, I knew some of the bankers that were dealing with the Shannon estate. And one of the agents working with me again had been pushing like hell, trying to get things listed from them, and was having a terrible time. Mm-hmm. And the friend of mine that had bought that building called me and said, "John, we just sold a $30 million tract of land near Dulles Airport, and we would like to do a 1031 exchange. Do you know of any expensive property, any good properties for sale?" And I said, "I know one, I think it's for sale, but it's not on the market. Will you pay a commission? We can do it." He said, "Well, how much of a commission do you want?" I said, 2.5%. He said, "Okay, I'll pay 2.5% commission. All verbal. No.
All verbal.
All verbal." You got to trust one side of the commission, one side of the table.
Do you? But that's changed. So obviously somebody didn't uphold their part of the bargain, and so we had to go to writing.
Well, most people do it in writing, but I did it verbally.
So can I ask you a question? So what advice do you have for agents who are faced with or afraid of that high dollar property? Because sometimes it feels a little too big for you.
I've never thought that. I mean, they need our help as much as anybody.
Yes.
It doesn't matter how much money you have. You generally are trying to make more. And if I can help you make money, you're going to let me do it.
So don't think about the dollar amount. Think about the service part of it.
Think about, can you make it happen? Can you make it happen? This particular chance was, I called the bankers and I said, "Look, I know it's nothing for sale, but I understand it could be bought. I have a gentleman who has a $30 million 1031 exchange. They are willing to pay me a commission. You don't have to pay me. Do you want to talk to them?" They said, "Yes, we do," and they drove up and picked me up the next day, and we drove to Alexandria and met with my friends. We wrote a 1-page letter of intent.
And that was it.
And that put that deal together, and just as soon as they got the deal put together, the deal in Dulles fell apart.
The one by the airport.
Right. But these guys had enough money between them that they were still credible. So they kept negotiating with the bank. At that point, Carl Silver called them and offered them $17.2 million for the piece of property they had under contract for $16.2. They told him that if they only wanted to make $1 million, they wouldn't have bought it.
Okay.
They kept negotiating. Carl was paying cash, they had terms. They negotiated with the bank and got the price reduced to $14.2 million. They pushed on Carl and got him up to somewhere around $19 million.
Okay.
Plus a building, the C&P building, over on Hudgens Road that was kicking $143,000 a year. That was a rent they was bringing in.
Wow, my goodness.
They settled on that with the Virginia Land Trust. Used Carl's money to pay for it, and changed beneficiaries the following day. They didn't even have to pay closing costs twice.
Cannot believe you remember the details of these transactions.
Sure.
That's impressive.
Sure.
That's impressive. So what would you say to young agents starting out in this business? What tips can you give them to be successful?
Nothing's impossible. Nothing's impossible.
I remember you saying to me once that the hardest part about being a real estate agent for you, or in general, is getting up, going to work every day.
Well, you get up, go to work every day.
Every day.
And you look for something to do. I mean, it's like pulling a string on you've got a
thread. Yeah.
thread. You pull the thread, you pull it enough, you pull the sleeve off. And the thread is attached to something. Going up 95, I saw a friend he told me he was buying a piece of property in Dumfries. I saw they were working on it. I stopped to see it. That was the landfill there that Mr. Crippen owns there. And I said, Bob, what are you going to do with it? He said, I'm going to sell it. I said, how much do you want for it? He said, $4 million. I said, I know somebody will buy it. He said, who? I said, Matt Crippen, the man that owns the stump dump over in Lorton. Oh, not Lorton. Stump dump though. And he said, well, why don't you call him and get him over here and show it to him. I said, I don't have his number. He said, it's right here in this book. And I was in his office. So I reached him. I said, sure, I'll call him. Mr. Crippen, I understand you're looking for another debris landfill. Got one approved right here in Dumfries. Would you like to see it? He said, yes, sir, I'd like to see it right now. And he flew down in his helicopter and landed that day on that piece of property and ended up buying it. $4 million.
So it takes a little bit of luck as well.
Well, I'd heard about that at a cocktail party the night before over on Marlboro Point.
Just so happened you were at a cocktail party.
I just heard about it. And that worked.
Wow. Well, what are some of the biggest mistakes you've seen agents to make that you would advise against?
Not calling the next door neighbor when you've got something for sale.
Literally the next door neighbor.
Literally the next door neighbor.
Wow. So people don't even think about that.
A lot of people don't, but all the good agents do.
Have you had an instance where you found that the next door neighbor was interested in purchasing the property?
Sure. And if they don't if they're not interested, they want to know who's going to buy it. They'd like to somebody buy it that they happen to like.
The neighbors are invested in that area, so they want to make sure.
Sure, they want to know who's going to be the next door neighbor. They'd like to be able to be comfortable with them and appreciate them.
Yes.
That all works.
Well, I guess that makes sense. How can agents stay? So the market's up and down all the time, and so how can agents who are starting in this business stay motivated and disciplined through a slow market? How do you stay engaged?
There's always a buyer. I used to say that I had a bunch of ne'er-do-wells. I had other names for them. That would buy. They were bottom feeders.
Wow. So explain it to me.
That's somebody that will buy if the price is right.
There's always somebody.
There's always somebody that'll buy if the price is right.
So you don't let the market changes impact you?
It impacts you, yes. You know that there are some people who have to sell. And it's terrible, and I don't like it, but if you've got a piece of property that has to be sold, there is a buyer out there. He may not pay you 100 cents on the dollar, but he'll buy it because he thinks he can make money.
Gotcha.
And you deal with them too. They're your buzzards, or your whatever you want to call them. They're there and they've got the money.
And that's what we're trying to do at the end of the day.
If you got to make a sale. If you can't get them, it's the only way I know. I mean, I don't know any other way.
Wow. What's the biggest change you've seen today? that you don't like?
I don't particularly, well, I don't want to talk bad about anybody. One of the toughest things now is people forget who they're working for. Sometimes.
Talk to me more about that. What do you mean?
Well, because of the extension we have of agency in the real estate business today. When I started, you worked for the transaction. You weren't working for buyer or seller, you were working for the transaction, trying to make it work. Now you're working for the buyer or the seller, or you're working for the buyer, or you're working for the seller, and the buyer has got to have enough sense to act on his own. I do a fair amount of transactions where I work for the seller, and the buyer is not a customer, but not a client, but they're a buyer acting in their own behalf. And they've allowed me to do it because most of the buyers that I'm dealing with are smart enough to act on their own.
Wow.
And that happens in the commercial side. It doesn't necessarily happen in the residential side.
That's interesting. So on the commercial side, the buyer is
Sometimes. We work with dual agency
a lot
as well as some represented agency. But in the majority of the cases, I will work for the seller, and the buyer will, if I'm working with the buyer and the seller, the buyer will be acting on his own. He's not represented by me.
Interesting. But on the residential side, the buyer relies very heavily
on the agent.
Yes.
And that's part of the reason they use dual agency, or they use designated agency.
So when you said they have to remember that they're working for the transaction to win, do you think that there's more of a power struggle going on, that they forget about that?
When you're up in the numbers that we're talking about, in the millions of dollars, and the commissions in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, there's a lot of temptation.
Gotcha. Okay.
Enough said there.
So you need to just remember what the ultimate goal is.
Remember who you're working for.
I like that. So I have to tell you, because you say you started in 1971. I don't know if you've noticed, but there are a lot of different generations that have cropped up since then. How do you do with working with younger agents? Is that a struggle, and if it is, how?
My biggest problem is I think everybody knows what I know. I don't think I'm any smarter than they are. I don't think I know more than they do. And I call somebody to say, do this. I expect them to know how.
Do they know how?
No.
That's the problem.
And I'm somewhat short with them. I don't mean to be.
Do you not see them as go-getters in terms of learning the business? What do you think that's attributed to?
I don't think they know what they don't know.
There you go.
They don't realize what they don't know.
Yeah. And what's your advice to them? How do they find out what they don't know and then go find out how to know it?
Ask questions. Most young people don't want you to know. They think that they're trying to pretend they know everything. And I'd like to know what I thought I knew 20 years ago.
Right. But you gotta learn.
Right.
You gotta learn. You gotta pay your dues.
You do.
So what about communicating with them in transactions?
I should spend more time training than I do. I thought people could watch me and figure it out.
Not the case.
They don't. I wish I could, if I could figure out how to clone me, I would. People, a lot of people seem to think I'm a little tough and hard to get along with, but I'm really pretty easy. I've given 160, almost 160 pints of blood.
That's tough.
No, it's not.
That's a tough
That's
person.
easy. I always do that. You can always do that.
Wow. So because you watched and learned, right? You watched how things were done and you learned. So you sort of expect that they would do some of that too. But they're not doing that. So how are they learning? Are they just relying on continuing education classes?
Some are. Now, you know, one of the persons I think that's learned a great deal is Virgil Nelson. Virgil used to work for me.
Now, I don't know who Virgil Nelson
Virgil
is.
does most of the leasing in the city of Fredericksburg.
Ah, I see. And he used to work for you.
Right. He was a chicken salesman when I met him.
Wow, okay. So you've called a lot of people into this business.
Right.
So Virgil, tell me about Virgil and
Virgil is one of the nicest, most generous, best agents in the Fredericksburg area.
you taught him.
I didn't teach him, I helped him.
He was a
taught
go-getter.
himself.
He was a go-getter.
He is a CCIM. I went to all the CCIM classes, but I never took the time to go get the designation. I was busy making money. But Virgil has gotten a CCIM. He's worked hard. He started with Sullivan, and now he's with Tallheimers. His son works with him, and I'll never say a bad thing against him. He's a nice man.
Wow. So if you could give me 3 things, pieces of advice for agents trying to make it in this business, what would they be?
Be honest.
Be honest. Anything else?
Work when people want you to work. That. Be honest. Do work when people want you to work.
And ask questions when you don't know.
And ask questions when you don't know the answer.
I got it. Anything else you want to share with us before we wrap it up?
Trying to think of anything I could think of. I think I told you most of what's going on. I've missed probably 8 or 9 deals. One of the people I need to thank in this business has been Hugh Cosner.
And tell me who he is and why do you
Hugh
need to thank him?
was a partner in all the Pizza Huts around town.
You know some big people. Go ahead.
Okay, nice man.
Yes.
And I bought and sold some property for him. He couldn't get along with Carl Silver. He was upset with Carl, or they didn't get together. And he owned all the property at Massaponax.
Wow.
So I put he and Carl together and sold him the Cosner's Corner piece at Massaponax.
I see.
Then they decided they could get along, and they kicked me out. And they got in a hell of a lawsuit. And
Not from you.
no, with each other, with each other. And Hugh lost the lawsuit. He had to pay all the expenses.
So what did he do that you owe such gratitude?
He had long-term vision. He could look down the road and see what should be coming for the Fredericksburg and Spotsylvania region. Wow. He's the one that talked the city of Fredericksburg into giving Spotsylvania County the mall.
Wow, okay.
And the reorganization of the city. He had the ability to look and see what was coming.
That sounds like a gift.
It is a gift.
Yeah.
And he had it, and I admired him for it. But he would wear you out talking to you. We'd go look at a building, and he'd say, "Now, John, you see the way they built that? They put those two boards together right there, and they shouldn't have done that. That should have been placed over here, or it should have been done that way."
So he knew his business.
He was in construction. He owned a little store out in the Spotsylvania courthouse that cashed more checks than the National Bank on weekends. And he would buy a piece of property and fix it up and resell it. Old farms. He made a ton of money, and he owned all those Pizza Huts.
And is he still?
No, he died here a year or so ago.
Oh, okay.
He was partners with Ray Glazebrook, but Ray didn't put any money in the deal. He just said he'd be a partner, and they were partners for 20 years and got $500,000 apiece a year out of it.
Well, Mr. Simpson, I'm going to tell you, it has been an honor to sit right here today and listen to you. When I talked to you on the phone, I was so excited about what you were saying to me. We have to talk to him.
Well, it's fun.
Yes, yes.
The real estate business has been wonderful to me.
Well, I'm hearing, yes, and you've shared that though. You've passed it down, what you know.
Hope.
So, yes.
I hope.
Well, with this interview, you're even passing more information to our agents today. So,
if I can do anything to help them, I'm happy to. Tomorrow night, I've got another class. Got 6 more agents trying to get started.
So this is your legacy. So, good job. Thank you so much for being with us
Glad
today.
to do it. Take care.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Far Louder. Find more resources at farmembers.com.